Today I'm going to show you guys how I recreated All My Ghosts by Lizzy McAlpine. We're going to get into alternative tunings for guitar, how to make electric guitar into a sound design element, some chord theory, and a whole lot more. But before we get into all that, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Seth. I produce music under the name Velvet Year. I do one of these videos every Friday to show people how to produce their own music at home. Songs I've either written or produced have been featured on these Spotify curated playlists, and I did an entire album through Warner Music Group. So if you watch this video and you think we'd have fun working on a project together, check out the top link in my description. Also, I'm trying to take Twitch a little bit more seriously, but I can't really dedicate a whole lot of time to it unless I know people are interested in it. So if you would like me to do some live stream breakdowns, I'm sporadically streaming every once in a while now, but if we can get to like 50 followers, I'll know there's a decent amount of interest and then I can make it a part of my routine. And now on to the actual track. One of the more fun elements of this song is the guitars, specifically their tuning. Listen to these real quick. I've deduced that in this track, all of the acoustic guitar parts are tuned to a DADGAD tuning, which for any of you who are not guitar players is a tuning where you drop your low E string down to a D, and then your B string down to an A, and your high E string down to a D. And it creates this very interesting texture. You end up naturally coming up with a lot of different voicings, and I wouldn't be surprised if they actually wrote this song in a DADGAD tuning and then produced the rest of the song around it. You can really hear it on the chorus with that jangly high end. Like the higher strings feel like you're playing this interesting chord shape. But when I was playing it, I was literally just playing the 3 bottom strings. And when you're in the key of D sharp, because I put a capo on it, you get these very interesting textures on the higher strings that are not normal for acoustic guitars. So if none of you have ever used DADGAD tuning before, I would highly recommend experimenting with it. It makes some really cool stuff. But in terms of arrangement, I picked the 2 main parts of the song that I felt encompassed the vibe the most, which were these plucky acoustics here, which have this really sharp staccato-y feel. And then when it eventually transitions to the next part of the song, it completely 180s it. Like the rest of the band follows suit with that. And I wouldn't be surprised if when they were writing the song, that was just how they were playing stuff. Like when she was writing the verses, this was just the part she was playing. And then when she would go to the chorus, she would do the big strummy chords. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because a lot of times for singer-songwriter style stuff, it can actually be more helpful to write the song in an arranged and dynamic way so that when you eventually get to the production process, it's kind of natural to just follow what the acoustic guitar is doing, or a piano if that's how you wrote it, and just sort of layer up on the different sections where it's going heavy and cut off when it's going light. Also, when you do dynamic stuff like this stop that they play here, that's a lot easier to do when you're in the writing process because it's you just strumming a chord and then cutting it and coming back in. Whereas if you were to produce this song out fully, you may not come up with that kind of arrangement or a cut because, as you can see, for all of the different instruments, I actually played that cut. I like muted my strings and then came back in on the 2 of that downbeat, which I prefer to do it this way because when you do cuts dynamically after the fact, after you've already tracked everything, it tends to sound a bit choppy. Whereas when you do it naturally like this, I feel like there's almost a live band quality to it. You get everybody raking in on the 2. But yeah, in terms of the actual sound of these acoustics, I used my pencil condenser AKG P117 on my Yamaha acoustic, going into my Antelope interface with a bit of a high pass on it. Since these are low guitars and this is a really dense mix, we really wanted to sculpt out all of this lower range that we need. And then the pick attack was a bit harsher on this one, so I ended up cutting that a lot. Throw it into some R-Comp. Honestly, I know people love to dig on Waves plugins, but R-Comp is genuinely one of the most practical compressors that I have in my arsenal. Going into some L1 to tame the peaks, I normally just get the sound exactly where I want it, and then I'll just sort of lower these guys until we're just taming those peaks. And when I'm double tracking it, I'll just kind of take this whole chain and then copy and paste it to the other one. So that way, when both of them are playing, we're getting a very even feel from ear to ear. I think one of the downsides of poor double tracking is you start to get this like dip when there's any inconsistencies in the volume. Throwing on some light compression and some limiting on the end of it really helps a lot. And then the two of them are going into a bus where I did some more shaping, a little bit of dynamic EQ just because the lows and the highs were kind of crazy, and then some tape saturation for some warmth and for some age. This is one of the cooler layers that I got to design for this track. There's almost this Tine style piano part going in as a transition on one of the verses. And to replicate that, I took like an una corda sound from Complete, and then I rendered it out as audio. And then I actually set this audio to beats and then transient enveloped it. So without it, it just sort of gets that like weird tiny feel to it, and then some reverb and delay on it. There's some very interesting ear candy in this track that honestly I think was a majority of my time replicating the production, and I don't even think I got all of it. For this intro part, we have some electrics kind of following what the acoustics are doing, but slightly different. I think actually in the original track, these are like an octave down and they're doubling the acoustic, which was my bad. I didn't realize that till after. But there is a texture like this that's sort of doing like a higher version of the lower part. It's just as well as this, they're also doing double of the exact part that these acoustics are playing. Just using a Roland jazz chorus for this one with a little bit of a compressor before it. This Prince in the Rain preset is actually pretty versatile. I just turn off the studio reverb in the ensemble if I don't really need that 80s vibe, because otherwise it's a pretty dialed patch. We have that same part doing a variation of itself in the chorus. As you can hear, it's a little bit more drivey. I think I swapped it over to this Andy in a Bottle preset, just because even though the part was the same, I wanted it to have a little bit more bite to it, because otherwise I would use this same tone in this section of the song and it would kind of just disappear. Then we have a couple of rhythm electrics layered underneath the acoustic in the chorus. Really fuzzy, really drivey, not a lot of low end. It's actually kind of hard to hear them in the mix, but I feel like when you blend them up subtly, the whole mid-range of the song just kind of gets filled out a lot more. They're almost like a pad, if that makes any sense. They're just using like a Tweed Deluxe with some EQ. For this specific part, I swapped over to my Jazz Master because I wanted it to be a bit darker, because up to this point, everything I had done had been with my Strat. Using that same Andy in a Bottle preset, my Strat to make a lead line going into the chorus. If you want that tone on a Strat, a large part of it comes from what pickup you're using. So normally I recommend people set it all the way to the bottom one and then one up from that, which is the bridge pickup and the middle pickup. It has that sort of twang and edge to it. And if you're going through a higher patch, it actually gets rid of some of that 6-cycle hum that can be kind of annoying on a Strat. Like, I think Corey Wong never actually leaves that position on his Stratocasters most of the time. And then under all of that, we have these sort of sound design layers on the electric. This guy, which I got from running my guitar into a really drivey patch that I then low shelf, ran into some saturation knob, some one knob pumper on an 8th note, offset by 180 degrees, a little bit more EQ and some auto pan, because it just sort of like sweeps in a little bit. Here, I'll show you what I mean with just the guitar layers on. It only comes up for like that one part, but it's actually a fun little texture. Also, at a point in the song, they have this guy, which has a tremolo on it. Which, if any of you are trying to get that sort of surf rock sound ever, it's almost impossible to get without tremolo. I personally like setting tremolo to like not the actual subdivisions of the song. I think it's cooler when it's like more random. Like, I don't know what 6.97 hertz is in relation, but I wanted it to be faster. And this guy is just kind of strumming out these simple chords underneath the rest of the song, which just kind of gives it that little bit of edge in certain sections. Underneath that, we have the bass, which in the verse is playing this. Very simple, just playing the chords. Something interesting to note is that in this intro section, all of the notes that it's playing, it's sort of like walking higher up the neck, even though some of the notes that he's playing right now could be lower on the neck. But the bass part has this sort of dynamic feature to its playing where, depending on what section of the song it's in, it's playing on a different range on the neck. So when it wants more power, it goes down to those lower notes. In the chorus, it's just playing the chords again. Which, something that is worth talking about are the actual chords of the song. We've talked about how they're using a DADGAD tuning, but even in that, there's a lot of really fun stuff that they're just sort of throwing in. Like here. That really spicy chord is actually an F7. And for any of you who don't know your theory, when you say a 7 chord and you don't say like major 7 or minor 7 and you just say 7, you're almost always talking about a dominant 7 chord, which is a major chord with a 1, 3, and a 5, but with a flat 7. And it adds this really spicy texture. And there's just such a breath of relief when it goes to that 4, because this 7 chord is actually playing on the 2, which already has a bit of like a neutral feeling, but that sense of resolve just comes in on the 4 so strongly. And then they play another spicy chord, which is the same 4 chord they just played, only now it's a minor. So it's literally a G sharp major to a G sharp minor, which is how you get that sort of like super melancholy walking down feel. Again, all of this stuff was probably stuff that they wrote when it was just on an acoustic. And for the production, they just kind of extrapolated the songwriting ideas that they had into the production and arrangement of the track. After that, we have some trumpets. Something I have noticed about trumpets, just in the form of MIDI, is that it actually works a lot better when you don't quantize your performances. And as you can see for these two guys, I actually did 2 different performances because they're not perfectly aligned with each other. But that almost makes it better because it has this sort of doubling feel, which you can get away with on instruments like a trumpet, because there isn't really a strong transient the same way that there is with a drum. It sort of softly rolls into the note. And actually, I kind of lied, because it's really only 1 trumpet here, which is just this regular contact solo trumpet, but it sounded kind of cheesy by itself. Like it had a very sampley feel to it. So in order to get more of that organic feel into it, I layered it with a tenor saxophone. And with both of them, I was using the mod wheel on my MIDI controller to add some performance elements to them. So, which when you have both of those instruments going at the same time and they have different breath controls going and they're not exactly perfect, and the MIDI of them, they're playing the same notes, but they're not perfectly lined up or quantized to the grid. In my experience doing it this way, you can make virtual instruments sound pretty realistic. And then the last instrument we have to look over are the drums. So I just grabbed a Leno kick and a Leno snare. And if I was gonna redo this track remake again, the one thing I would probably change is how I approach the drums, because at the beginning of the process, I approached them from like a sample standpoint, but after making a track this way, I feel like I would rather go and just recreate the kit as a whole, because there's a lot of like live drummer nuances that I was kind of missing when I was using the samples. But yeah, just doing a little bit of shaping to get everything to fit together with the rest of the track. Something that I used to do when I was in my like hip hop trap making days that I forgot I used to do that I did for this snare is I used to throw max bass on my snare drum to get it a bit beefier, which was kind of a nostalgic thing to do. It's basically a low end exciter. Like here, if I solo the original low end of the snare and then switch over to max bass, it just sort of adds more throatiness to it. Not what it was intended for, but it kind of works. For some hi-hats, I just grabbed a loop from that Sounds Elements. In the chorus, I actually gained the clip down because I still wanted that chugging motion of the hi-hat in the chorus. There's actually like a ride and stuff playing, and so I just kind of wanted to subtly blend it in. So I just went into the clip and gained it down by 6 dB so that I could keep it in without it being distracting. And then for all the cymbals, I'm just using GGD Modern Fusion. For this one, I did a bit of transient shaping and actually removed some of the transient because there was a little bit of harshness on that ride. So here, if I turn that off, turn it on, it just removes a little bit of the attackiness of it, or the pinginess, threw it into some compression, some EQ to tame some of like the higher stuff, and then sidechained it to the kick and the snare the same way that I would if it was like the overhead mics of a mix, and then just some shaker underneath it. Didn't really do anything for the master other than cut some low end, cut a little bit of the high end out with a filter, very, very light compression into a limiter. So let's listen to what the entire track sounds like together. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Again, I do one of these videos every Friday. So if you enjoyed this content, please hit subscribe and all that stuff. But yeah, see you guys next week.